Welcome back, Wasteland Wanderers. Today's confession comes from the sands of Egypt, where the pyramids stand as monuments to both ancient wisdom and corporate folly. We're diving deep into one of Vault-Tec's most disturbing experiments, the Egyptian Vault Network, where pre-war executives thought they could imprison their test subjects in tombs older than civilization itself. Let's hear what one survivor discovered in the depths beneath the pyramids and why their escape might have come too late to save anyone. They said the pyramids would stand forever. They just never mentioned we'd be the ones sealed inside them, listening to Geiger counters click in chambers where pharaohs once slept. My name doesn't matter anymore, but what I'm about to tell you does. Because 200 years after the bombs fell, I finally learned the truth about Vault Giza, and it's worse than you can imagine. I was born in the lower chambers of what pre-war tourists called the Great Pyramid of Khufu, now officially designated as Vault Giza by the rusted Vault-Tec plaques bolted over hieroglyphics. The metal looked obscene there, corporate logos stamped across stone that had stood for 5,000 years before America even existed. My Pip-Boy 3000 still displays my vault assignment, Resident 2847, Sublevel Theta, Experimental Protocol Active, whatever the hell that means in a tomb that predates the old world by millennia. Growing up, they taught us we were the lucky ones. The Overseer, a man whose grandfather had been selected by Vault-Tec executives themselves, would gather us in the Grand Gallery, that massive corbelled passage soaring 26 feet high, and tell us how fortunate we were. Chosen to preserve human civilization in structures that had already survived 5,000 years, now reinforced with pre-war radiation shielding and concrete poured directly over limestone blocks that weighed 2.5 tons each. The vault experiment was simple on paper. Seal 2,000 American and Egyptian citizens inside pyramid complexes converted into nuclear shelters, then observe how cultural integration under extreme duress would play out. They picked people with connections to Egypt, archaeologists, and engineers, along with Egyptian nationals who'd been working with American companies. My grandmother was one of them, a structural engineer from Cairo who'd been contracted to help retrofit the Sphinx's underground chambers into hydroponics labs. She met my American grandfather during the installation of atmospheric processors in what used to be the Queen's Chamber. What Vault-Tec didn't account for was that the ancient tomb networks ran deeper than their sensors could map, connecting pyramids across the Nile Delta through passages older than recorded history, passages that the ancient builders had sealed with such precision that modern equipment couldn't detect them. We only discovered them when Section 7 flooded in year 43, and someone noticed water draining into cracks between stones that supposedly formed a solid wall. When the bombs fell on October 23rd, 2077, I wasn't even born yet. My grandparents were mid-level engineers who'd been recruited to help convert sacred spaces into survival infrastructure. They told me stories about watching the tourists flee when the air raid sirens started, how people fought and clawed at the sealed vault doors while Vault-Tec security held them back. 2,000 made it inside, 40,000 didn't. You could still hear them screaming through the stone for 3 days after the doors sealed. My grandmother said, until the radiation sickness took them or the fires consumed what was left of Cairo. The first generation went insane from the isolation and the constant sand seeping through every seal. Despite all the pre-war technology, all the concrete and steel reinforcement, the desert found its way in. Fine particles that got into everything: food, water, lungs. People started coughing blood by year 5. That's when they started worshipping the old gods again, painting radiation symbols over ancient falcon-headed deities carved 3,000 years before Christ walked the earth. Someone spray-painted a Vault Boy mascot onto a relief of Horus and called it divine synchronicity. By the time I could walk, our vault had fractured into dynasties. The Horus clan controlled the water purification system housed in the king's chamber, surrounded by 500-year-old pink granite brought from Aswan quarries by people who didn't even have the wheel yet. The Anubis sect hoarded medical supplies in what they called the Osiris Crypt, a series of chambers Vault-Tec had carved beneath the pyramid's bedrock foundation, and the Set Brotherhood, they controlled access to the fusion reactor, built into the underground boat pit where ancient Egyptians once stored the solar bark, a ceremonial vessel meant to carry the pharaoh to the afterlife. The overseer's descendants declared themselves the new pharaohs. They wore pre-war hazmat suits, painted gold with spray cans salvaged from maintenance lockers, carrying scepters made from reinforced steel rebar pulled from collapsed vault sections. The current one, a man who called himself Ramses VII, but whose real name was Robert Walsh according to pre-war personnel records, ruled from a throne built inside the Grand Gallery. He'd found a power armor chassis in a Vault-Tec storage depot, one of those things the Brotherhood of Steel used to wear, and had it painted in lapis lazuli blue and electrum gold. Divine right through Vault-Tec bloodline, he claimed. I learned to read both Arabic script on crumbling pre-war terminals and hieroglyphics carved into walls by people who never saw a nuclear bomb. Both felt equally alien and familiar, ancient languages speaking across impossible spans of time. The terminals told stories of vault construction timelines, of budget overruns and corner cutting, of Vault-Tec executives betting on which cultural group would dominate the social experiment. The hieroglyphics told stories of eternal kingdoms and gods who walked among men, of death and resurrection, and the promise that the worthy would live forever in fields of reeds. Neither promised what we got. Our vault's fusion reactor hummed constantly, a low-frequency vibration you felt in your bones more than heard. It powered lights that flickered whenever radstorms swept across the desert surface, electromagnetic pulses that played hell with pre-war electronics. The reactor's cooling system vented heat through the pyramid's air shafts, narrow passages that the ancient builders had carved for reasons archaeologists argued about for centuries. Now they glowed faint blue at night from Cherenkov radiation, making the pyramid visible from miles away across the glass desert. Every year, on opening day, they'd unseal one of the outer chambers, just long enough for us to glimpse the wasteland through gaps in the limestone, to see what 2 centuries of radiation had done to the world outside. The sand wasn't yellow anymore. It was streaked with green from the fallout, trinitite glass formations that stretched to the horizon, sharp enough to cut through boot leather. At night, the desert glowed, bioluminescent fungi growing in patterns that looked almost intentional, almost intelligent. The pyramids looked like they'd been built from frozen lightning. Raiders called themselves the Tomb Kings, descendants of vault dwellers who'd escaped decades ago, people who'd gone feral in the waste but retained enough intelligence to organize, to plan, to hate. They ruled the surface from camps built in the ruins of Luxor and Memphis, areas that had been vaporized in the initial strikes, but somehow remained habitable if you had enough rad resistance and didn't mind the three-eyed Brahmin. They'd discovered that the old tomb traps still worked. Pressure plates installed 4,000 years ago, combined with Vault-Tec laser grids and automated turrets, created killing floors that made raiding the vaults nearly impossible. But they tried. Oh, they tried. When I turned 18, I was assigned to the Cartouche Corps, vault security trained to defend the inner sanctums using both laser rifles powered by the fusion reactor and obsidian-tipped spears that tomb guardians had carried 3 millennia ago. The spears were ceremonial, they told us, symbolic of our duty to protect the tombs. But I'd seen what obsidian could do to a human body, volcanic glass sharper than any metal blade, and there was nothing ceremonial about the way we were taught to use them. The deepest vaults, the ones Vault-Tec built beneath the Saqqara Step Pyramid, were off-limits, marked with both danger radiation signs and 5,000-year-old curses that basically said the same thing. May the crocodile, the serpent, and the hippopotamus destroy he who disturbs this tomb. Then, beneath it, in smaller English text, authorized personnel only, Section 9 clearance required, lethal force authorized. Ancient and modern threats written one above the other. Rumor was that Vault-Tec had stored something down there before the bombs fell. Either pre-war experimental weapons or samples of the forced evolutionary virus they'd been testing in America. the stuff that created super mutants and God knows what else. The rumors intensified after year 70 when a scavenger team broke through a collapsed passage and found steel doors marked with biohazard symbols, sealed with locks that required both a keycard and a handprint scan. No one in the vault had that level of clearance, not even the new Pharaoh. The new Pharaoh controlled the only working surface elevator, though. Buried inside the Sphinx's chest cavity, a massive industrial lift that Vault-Tec had installed to transport materials during construction. It could carry entire caravans up from the vault levels to trade with surface settlements, moving silently on magnetic rails through a shaft lined with pre-war steel. Ramses VII used it to maintain his monopoly on trade, charging exorbitant fees to anyone who wanted access to surface markets. Trade caravans brought strange goods, Nuka-Cola bottles filled with purified Nile water, irradiated to hell but drinkable if you had enough rad away in your system. Ancient scrolls that turned out to be pre-war shopping lists and tax documents, worthless except as curiosities. Occasionally, they brought slaves, people captured from other vaults or wasteland settlements, sold to work the hydroponics farms or maintain the filtration systems. The new pharaoh claimed it was just like the old kingdom, that slavery was part of Egyptian tradition, conveniently ignoring that his own ancestors had outlawed the practice over a century before the bombs fell. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you next gets so much darker, and I need to know someone out there is listening to this confession, that someone will remember what really happened in Vault Giza, even if I don't make it out of this desert alive. The Brotherhood of Steel had a chapter here once. They called themselves the Crimson Scarabs, wore Egyptian motifs on their power armor, ankhs and scarabs painted in red alongside the Brotherhood's gear and sword insignia. They'd arrived about 60 years before I was born, chasing rumors of pre-war military technology hidden in the tombs. The new pharaoh at the time, Ramses IV, had made a deal with them, access to the sealed sections in exchange for protection against the Tomb King's raiders. For 20 years it worked. The Brotherhood brought discipline and firepower, their laser rifles and power armor turning back raiding parties that had plagued the vaults for decades. Then, one day, they just disappeared. All of them. 40 Brotherhood knights and scribes, gone without a trace into the western desert. The official story was that they'd followed leads about some kind of technological cache, an old-world military installation that supposedly held experimental weapons. But I'd heard other stories whispered in the dark passages of sub-level Theta, stories about what the Brotherhood had found in the sealed sections, about why they'd left so suddenly, about the look of absolute terror on their paladin's face when he'd emerged from Section 9 clearance areas. Nobody talked about it openly, but everybody knew. The Brotherhood had seen something down there, something that made hardened veterans in power armor flee into the wasteland rather than spend another night inside the pyramid. Every full moon, rad scorpions the size of automobiles would emerge from the desert, descendants of the sacred scarabs that once crawled through these tombs, North American emperor scorpions that had been popular pets before the war. Radiation and the forced evolutionary virus had transformed them into armored nightmares, 8 feet long with stingers that dripped radioactive venom, glowing faint green in the darkness. They'd tunnel up through the sand, bursting from the ground without warning, their chitinous plates thick enough to deflect small arms fire. The first time I saw one, I was on perimeter patrol with the Cartouche Corps. It erupted from a dune 50 yards away, mandibles clicking, that massive tail curled over its back like a question mark written in chitin and death. My partner fired his laser rifle, the beam scorching a line across its carapace that barely slowed it down. These things were survivors, evolved specifically for the wasteland, faster and more aggressive than their pre-war ancestors. We only survived because it got distracted by a two-headed Brahmin that wandered too close to its territory. The vault's agriculture section was built in the Valley of the Kings, underground chambers where pharaohs had been buried for centuries during the New Kingdom period. Vault-Tec had cleared out the mummies, the golden artifacts, everything of value and installed ultraviolet lamps and irrigation systems. Now wheat and barley grew in tombs that had once held the bodies of rulers whose names echoed through history, tended by workers who'd never seen real sunlight but prayed to Ra anyway, kneeling before crude altars built from equipment crates and decorating them with faded images of the sun disk. I worked a shift there once, temporary assignment when the regular crew came down with radiation sickness from a leak in Section 12. Walking through those chambers, past walls still covered in hieroglyphics depicting the journey to the afterlife, while fluorescent grow lights hummed overhead and drip irrigation systems hissed. The disconnect was surreal, ancient promises of eternal life carved in stone, surrounded by the desperate attempts of modern people just trying to survive another day. Pre-war. Holotapes recovered from collapsed sections revealed the truth Vault-Tec had hidden from the original inhabitants. I found one in a damaged terminal, the audio corrupted but still comprehensible. A woman's voice, crisp and professional, recorded 3 months before the bombs fell. She was a Vault-Tec executive named Barbara Howard, discussing the Egyptian vault experiment with what sounded like other corporate representatives. We're betting that mixing ancient cultural sites with atomic age technology will create psychologically resilient survivor populations, she said, her tone suggesting she was reading from notes. The psychological anchoring to historical permanence should counteract the trauma of nuclear war. These people will wake up every day surrounded by proof that civilizations can endure for millennia. It should make them more compliant, more willing to follow authority, more resistant to the despair that's crippled other vault populations. Another voice, male, uncertain. What about the religious aspect? We're putting people inside sacred spaces, structures that millions have worshipped for thousands of years. Howard's laugh was cold. That's the point. We want them to develop quasi-religious attachments to vault authority. The pharaohs ruled as living gods for 3,000 years. If our overseers can tap into that psychological framework, we'll have created the perfect hierarchical society. No rebellion, no dissent, just generations of obedient citizens who believe their leaders have divine mandate. They were wrong. What they created were people who remembered both the age of pharaohs and the age of Adams, trapped between worship of ancient gods and the cold logic of pre-war science. Neither worldview could explain the horror of what had happened, the incomprehensible destruction of nuclear war, the mutations and madness that followed. So people created new myths, new gods, blending the old and the new into something that made survival bearable even if it didn't make sense. When I finally escaped through a collapsed outer wall during a rad storm, I expected to find nothing but death outside. The electromagnetic pulse from the storm disabled the vault door sensors for 47 seconds, just long enough for me to slip through a maintenance passage that had been partially excavated by raiders years ago. The sand was like broken glass beneath my boots, each step crunching through centuries of accumulated radiation fallout mixed with wind-blown desert. But the surface wasteland wasn't empty. It was full of ghoul mummies, people who'd been buried in the old ways before the war, then woke up after the radiation seeped into their tombs. They shambled through the ruins of the Egyptian museum, their wrappings falling away to reveal necrotic flesh that glowed green in the darkness, speaking Arabic so ancient even our vault scholars couldn't understand it. Pre-Islamic, maybe even older languages that had died out before the Ptolemaic period. Whatever the radiation had done to preserve their bodies, it had also preserved something of their minds, fragmented memories of civilizations that had crumbled to dust 3,000 years before America existed. I watched one of them from a collapsed colonnade, an old woman whose wrappings hung in tatters around radiation-scorched skin. She was singing, a melody I'd never heard but somehow recognized, the cadence and rhythm matching hymns carved on tomb walls. She was praising Osiris, Lord of the Dead, asking him to guide her back to the fields of reeds, the Egyptian afterlife. But she was already dead, had been dead for probably 4,000 years, and the radiation had brought her back into a world that had nothing left to offer her except more suffering. The Nile itself had become a river of sludge, thick with radiation and industrial runoff from pre-war factories. But it was still flowing after 200 years, still the lifeline of the wasteland, still following the same course it had carved through the desert when the pyramids were new. Wastelanders had built settlements along its banks, mud brick towns that looked almost medieval, trading in bottle caps and ancient artifacts with equal value. They'd learned which sections of the river were safe to drink from and which would kill you in hours, passed down through generations of trial and fatal error. New settlements were rising. I'd heard about them from traders who came to the vault, stories about Alexandria being rebuilt on the ruins of the old city, mud brick houses constructed from radioactive rubble, slave markets operating in the shadow of collapsed skyscrapers, merchants selling everything from pre-war technology to human flesh. The descriptions made it sound like stepping backward through time, like the nuclear war had reset civilization to some earlier state, forcing people to rebuild from scratch using whatever materials and knowledge they could scavenge. And everywhere, the pyramids stood, some sealed tight like Vault Giza, others cracked open and leaking radiation, all of them containing secrets that predated the bombs and would outlast whatever came next. I could see them from my position in the ruins, massive geometric shapes against the green-tinged sky, illuminated by bioluminescent clouds that rolled across the wasteland like waves of diseased light. They looked eternal, indestructible, exactly what Vault-Tec had counted on. What they hadn't counted on was what would happen to the people inside them. I need to tell you about Sub-Level Omega, because that's where everything went wrong, where the Vault experiment became something else entirely, something Vault-Tec never intended, or maybe they did and just didn't tell anyone. I discovered it 3 months before my escape, during a routine security patrol in restricted sections. The Cartouche Corps had access to areas regular Vault dwellers never saw, passages that went deeper than official maps showed. Following the ancient tunnel networks, the pre-war builders had found and tried to seal. We were checking radiation seals in Section 14, 400 feet below the pyramid's base, when my Geiger counter started screaming. Not the slow click-click of ambient radiation, but a sustained shriek that meant lethal exposure, the kind of dose that would kill you in hours, even with Radaway. My partner, a man named Ahmed, whose family had been in the vault since the doors sealed, wanted to turn back immediately, but I'd noticed something, a pattern in the walls that didn't match the rest of the vault's construction. The stones were older, not Vault-Tec concrete or even the limestone blocks the ancient Egyptians had used for the pyramid proper, but something else, something that looked like it had been placed when the ground was new. Basalt maybe, or some kind of metamorphic rock I didn't recognize, carved with symbols that weren't hieroglyphics or any writing system I'd ever seen. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at too long, that seemed to shift and writhe in my peripheral vision. Ahmed was screaming at me to leave, his own Geiger counter adding its shriek to mine, but I kept moving forward. Something was wrong about this place, wrong in a way that went beyond radiation or structural instability. The air felt thick, resistant, like trying to walk through water, and there was a sound, barely audible beneath the Geiger counters, a rhythmic pulse that matched my heartbeat exactly. Then I saw the door. Steel, like the biohazard doors the scavenger team had found decades ago, but covered in those same geometric patterns, etched so deeply into the metal that they looked like they'd been there longer than the steel itself. And above the door, bolted to the ancient stone, a placard that made my blood run cold. Vault-Tec Special Projects Division, Artifact Containment and Study, Authorization Level Omega required, lethal force authorized against unauthorized personnel. By order of Barbara Howard, Executive Vice President, the same woman from the holotape, the one who'd designed the Egyptian Vault experiment, who'd talked about creating psychologically resilient populations and using ancient religious frameworks to ensure compliance. She'd built something down here, something that required the highest security clearance Vault-Tec had, something that generated enough radiation to kill anyone who got too close. I should have left. Ahmed was already gone, fled back up the passage the moment he'd seen that radiation reading. But I'd spent my entire life in those tombs, 18 years of being told what I could and couldn't know, of watching the new pharaoh hoard power while people died from ration medicine and recycled air. I was done following orders, done accepting the official story. The door wasn't locked, or rather, the locks had failed, corroded by 2 centuries of moisture and radiation. It took all my strength to pull it open. Ancient, hinges screaming in protest, and then I was through, into sub-level Omega, into the place Vault-Tec had built beneath the oldest pyramid on Earth. What I found there changed everything I thought I knew about the vaults, about the war, about what Vault-Tec had really been trying to accomplish. Because the chamber wasn't a containment facility or a storage depot, it was a temple. And the thing they'd been studying, the artifact that generated all that radiation, it was alive. Think about this. If you found a door like that in your vault, a door your leaders had hidden for 200 years, would you open it? Would you risk everything to know the truth, or would you walk away and let the lie continue? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If this story has kept you listening this far and you want more of these dark confessions from the Wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores, to keep digging through the ruins of the old world and bringing back the stories no one else wants to tell. Because what I'm about to describe next, what I saw in that chamber, it's the kind of truth that gets people killed. And I need to know someone will remember it if I don't make it out of this desert. The chamber was circular, maybe 50 feet across, carved from solid bedrock in a style that matched nothing I'd ever seen in the vault or in the ancient Egyptian sections. The walls were smooth, impossibly smooth, like they'd been melted rather than cut, and in the center, suspended in some kind of stasis field that crackled with blue-white energy, was an object that shouldn't exist. It looked like a sarcophagus at first glance, golden and ornate, covered in hieroglyphics that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. But as my eyes adjusted to the radiation haze and the pulsing light from the stasis field, I realized it wasn't Egyptian at all. The proportions were wrong, the symbols only superficially similar to hieroglyphics, like someone had tried to imitate them without understanding what they meant. And the material, what I'd thought was gold, it wasn't any metal I recognized. It absorbed light rather than reflecting it, creating an absence in the air around it, a void that my mind struggled to process. Around the suspended sarcophagus, Vault-Tec had installed a ring of equipment, monitoring stations, their screens still flickering with data after 200 years, powered by the same stasis field that held the artifact. Radiation sensors, spectral analyzers, devices I couldn't identify with functions I couldn't guess, and everywhere, plastered across the walls and equipment, warning signs in a dozen languages: danger, extreme radiation hazard, do not approach, authorized personnel only, lethal force authorized. But the most disturbing thing was the bodies. 3 of them, Vault-Tec scientists still wearing their lab coats, slumped over terminals or collapsed on the floor. They'd been dead for 2 centuries, mummified by the dry air and the radiation, their skin pulled tight over skulls, frozen in expressions of absolute terror. Whatever had killed them, it hadn't been quick or painless. One of them had clawed his own eyes out, bloody tracks still visible on his desiccated face. I approached the nearest terminal, keeping my distance from the stasis field, my Geiger counter's shriek reaching a pitch that made my teeth ache. The screen displayed a repeating loop, some kind of automatic recording that had been playing for 200 years. I touched the keyboard, and the loop stopped, replaced by a file directory labeled Project Eternal Pharaoh, classified Omega level, eyes only for Executive Oversight Committee. The files were extensive, hundreds of documents and video logs, research notes, and experimental data spanning decades before the bombs fell. I started with the earliest entry, dated January 15th, 2049, 28 years before the Great War. The author was Dr. Hassan Khalid, chief archaeologist for Vault-Tec's Egyptian operations, a man whose name I recognized from plaques in the upper vault sections. "We've made an extraordinary discovery in the unexplored chambers beneath the Saqqara Step Pyramid," he'd written, his words clinical despite the obvious excitement. "During excavation for the vault's foundation, our equipment detected an anomalous energy signature approximately 200 meters below the surface, in a chamber that predates the pyramid by at least 1,000 years, possibly much longer. The chamber appears to have been deliberately sealed by the pyramid's builders, filled with over 300 tons of granite blocks and protected by architectural features designed to prevent access." The next entry, 3 months later, described breaking through to the chamber and finding the artifact. "It defies analysis," Khalid wrote, his tone shifting from excitement to something else, something that sounded like fear, barely held in check. "Carbon dating is impossible. The object appears to exist outside normal spacetime, phasing in and out of measurable reality. Spectroscopy reveals elements that shouldn't exist, isotopes with decay rates that violate known physics. And the radiation signature, it's not gamma or beta or any form of ionizing radiation we understand. It's something else, something that interacts with biological tissue in ways we can't predict or control." Vault-Tec had immediately classified the discovery at the highest level, moving it to a specially constructed containment facility beneath what would become Vault Giza. They'd brought in specialists from across their organization, scientists who'd worked on other classified projects, things with names like Garden of Eden Creation Kit and Forced Evolutionary Virus, and others that were just alphanumeric designations, and they'd started experimenting. The video logs were worse than the written reports. I watched Dr. Khalid, a tired-looking man in his 50s, describe exposing test subjects to low-level emissions from the artifact. Rats at first, then dogs, then primates. The results were consistent: rapid cellular mutation, accelerated healing, enhanced cognitive function, and then always a complete psychological breakdown followed by death. The subjects would become increasingly aggressive, displaying behaviors that Khalid described as almost religious in nature, prostrating themselves before the artifact, speaking in languages they'd never learned, languages that didn't match any known human tongue. "We believe the artifact is exerting some form of psychic influence," Khalid said in a log dated 6 months before the war. He looked decades older than in the earlier videos, his hair gone white, his hands trembling visibly. The test subjects aren't just mutating physically, they're being rewritten at a fundamental level, their consciousness overwritten by something else, something ancient and utterly alien to human experience. 3 of my research assistants have requested transfers off the project. I've recommended psychiatric evaluation for all of them, including myself. But Vault-Tec didn't shut down the research. They accelerated it. Barbara Howard herself appeared in the later logs, that same cold professional voice from the holotape I'd found earlier. She was talking about applications, about using the artifact's influence to create enhanced soldiers, perfect workers, compliant populations that would rebuild civilization according to Vault-Tec's specifications. The Egyptian vault experiment wasn't just about studying cultural integration. It was about exposing an entire population to long-term low-level emissions from the artifact, seeing what effect it would have over generations. We've modified the vault's ventilation system to circulate air from sublevel Omega throughout the entire complex, Howard said in a video dated 1 week before the bombs fell. The exposure levels will be minimal, far below what causes acute symptoms, but sustained over decades, it should produce measurable psychological effects, increased suggestibility, enhanced respect for authority, a tendency toward religious thinking that we can channel into loyalty to Vault leadership. We're creating the foundation for a new civilization, one that will emerge from these tombs ready to worship the new pharaohs of the atomic age. I felt sick, nauseous in a way that had nothing to do with the radiation. Every headache, every strange dream, every inexplicable impulse to obey the overseer, to accept the hierarchy, to believe in the divine right of the new pharaoh, it wasn't natural. It was this thing, this artifact, slowly rewriting our minds over the course of 2 centuries. We'd been lab rats this entire time, test subjects in an experiment we never consented to, our thoughts and beliefs shaped by something that predated human civilization. The final log was Dr. Khalid, recorded on October 3rd, 2077, the day the bombs fell. He was alone in the chamber. The only other person visible was a colleague collapsed at a terminal in the background. Khalid looked directly into the camera, his eyes bloodshot, his face gaunt and drawn. "If anyone finds this, you need to understand what Vault-Tec has done," he said, each word carefully enunciated despite obvious exhaustion. "The artifact isn't a weapon or a tool or a power source. It's a prison. The ancient Egyptians found it, recognized what it was, and built the pyramids to contain it, layer upon layer of stone and mystical protection to keep it sealed away from the world. They understood that some things should never be disturbed, that there are forces older and more terrible than human comprehension." He coughed, blood flecking his lips. "We opened the prison. We studied what was inside. And now it's awake, reaching out through the ventilation systems, through the stone itself, touching the minds of everyone in these vaults. The bombs are falling right now. I can feel the building shaking. Civilization is ending, and Vault-Tec's last act was to ensure that whatever emerges from these tombs won't be entirely human anymore. Will be something else, something that serves the will of whatever's been sleeping beneath the pyramids for thousands of years." The video cut off. The terminal displayed a final line of text: "Containment failure imminent. Stasis field at 37%. Estimated time to complete failure, 6 months. May God forgive us for what we've unleashed." That was 200 years ago. The stasis field was still holding, barely, flickering and sparking with unstable energy. But the sarcophagus was different from the images in the research logs. The surface was changing, patterns shifting and flowing like liquid metal. And there were cracks now, hairline fractures leaking light that wasn't light, darkness that wasn't darkness, something my brain couldn't properly process. It was waking up. Whatever the ancient Egyptians had imprisoned, whatever Vault-Tec had studied and tried to weaponize, it was breaking free. And when the stasis field finally failed, when that thing emerged from its prison, I had the terrible certainty that the nuclear war would seem like a mercy compared to what came next. I heard footsteps in the passage behind me, boots on stone, multiple people moving fast, the cartouche corps, probably alerted by Ahmed, coming to drag me back to the upper levels, to silence me before I could tell anyone what I'd found. The new pharaoh couldn't let this information spread, couldn't let the vault dwellers know that their gods and rulers were nothing but puppets dancing to the tune of something ancient and inhuman. I grabbed what data crystals I could from the terminals, shoving them into my jumpsuit pockets, and ran. Not back toward the footsteps, toward certain capture and probable execution, but deeper into the chamber, toward a passage I'd spotted on the far side, one that the Vault-Tec researchers must have used for emergency evacuation. The Geiger counter was screaming loud enough to deafen me now. The radiation levels in this section would kill me in hours, but I'd rather die from radiation than let them bury the truth again. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, carved through solid bedrock and descending at a steep angle. I ran blind in the darkness, one hand on the wall for guidance, my Pip-Boy's light casting crazy shadows that seemed to move with purpose and intelligence. Behind me I heard shouts, orders being called out, the whine of laser rifles powering up. They were following, but the passage was too narrow for them to fire effectively, and I had a head start. The passage opened suddenly into another chamber, smaller than the artifact containment room, but no less disturbing. This one was full of equipment that looked more medical than scientific: examination tables and surgical tools and racks of syringes filled with luminescent fluid, and on the walls, photographs, dozens of them, showing vault dwellers at various stages of what the labels called enhanced integration protocols. People I recognized, elders of the vault who died years ago, their eyes glazed and empty, wounds on their scalps showing where electrodes had been implanted. Vault-Tec had been doing more than just exposing us to ambient radiation from the artifact. They'd been actively experimenting on Vault leadership, on the people who would shape policy and culture, ensuring that the most influential members of the community were the most thoroughly compromised. The new pharaohs weren't chosen by divine mandate or Vault-Tec bloodline. They were selected based on their susceptibility to the artifact's influence, their willingness to serve something older than humanity. Have you ever questioned authority in your own vault? Ever wondered why certain families always end up in power? Why some people seem almost supernaturally persuasive? Maybe you should start looking for hidden chambers, for the experiments your leaders don't want you to know about. The truth might be worse than you imagine, but isn't knowing better than living a lie? I found an exit, a maintenance shaft that led up toward the surface, bypassing the main vault sections entirely. The ladder was corroded, 200 years of moisture and radiation weakening the metal, but it held my weight. I climbed in darkness, the sounds of pursuit fading below me, my Geiger counter slowly decreasing from lethal to merely dangerous levels. When I finally reached the surface, pulling myself through a rusted grate into the green-tinged night of the Wasteland, I was a different person than the one who'd entered sublevel Omega hours earlier. I knew the truth now, the terrible secret that Vault-Tec had buried beneath the pyramids, and I knew that I couldn't go back, couldn't return to the false comfort of the vault, couldn't pretend that everything was normal when nothing had ever been normal at all. The pyramids stood around me, dark geometric shapes against a sky full of radioactive clouds, eternal, indestructible, hiding horrors that had existed before the first human built the first city, and inside them, sealed in stasis fields that grew weaker with each passing year, things that should never have been disturbed waited for their chance to break free. The Wasteland at night is a different world than the one you see during the day. The radiation clouds catch and hold light, glowing with bioluminescence from mutated bacteria that feed on fallout particles. Everything is tinged green and blue, like being underwater, like drowning in slow motion. I walked for hours across the glass desert, each step crunching through trinitite formations that had once been sand, that had been flash heated to temperatures hotter than the sun's surface when the bombs fell. I wasn't alone. The ghoul mummies followed me at a distance, shambling figures that seemed drawn to living humans, not with hunger or aggression, but with something else, something that looked almost like hope. They'd call out in their ancient dialects, asking questions I couldn't understand, reaching toward me with desiccated hands wrapped in rotting linen. I avoided them when I could, but there were so many, emerging from tombs and ruins like the desert itself was vomiting up its dead. On the second night, I encountered a caravan from New Alexandria. 6 people, heavily armed, leading 3 Brahmin loaded with salvage and trade goods. They saw my vault jumpsuit and laser rifle and knew immediately where I'd come from. The leader, a woman with radiation scars covering half her face and eyes that had seen too much, offered me water from a Nuka-Cola bottle and asked what I was running from. I told her everything about sublevel Omega, about the artifact, about Vault-Tec's experiments and the things sleeping beneath the pyramids. She listened without interrupting, her scarred face expressionless, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "There are other vaults," she said, her voice rough from years of breathing irradiated air. "Dozens of them scattered across what used to be Egypt, built into temples and monuments, hidden beneath the sand. We've opened 3 of them, scavenged what we could before the radiation or the traps or the things inside drove us out. Every single one had a chamber like you described, a containment facility, an artifact that didn't belong to any human civilization. Vault-Tec wasn't studying Egyptian history, they were studying something that predated Egypt, something that the ancients found and tried to seal away. She pulled out a map, pre-war paper protected in a plastic sleeve, marked with dozens of locations. The pyramids at Giza, Saqqara, Dashur, all of them. The temples at Luxor, Karnak, Abu Simbel, even the Sphinx. That thing is hollow, did you know that? Full of chambers that Vault-Tec converted into containment facilities. They found these artifacts all over Egypt, concentrated in areas the ancient Egyptians considered sacred, and instead of leaving them alone, they built vaults to study them, to weaponize them, to turn them into tools for reshaping humanity. How many have failed? I asked, thinking about Dr. Khalid's warning, about the stasis field at 37% and dropping. Her expression darkened. 7 that we know of. When the containment fails, everyone within 10 miles starts changing. Not like ghouls or super mutants, something different, something that makes people forget they're human. They start speaking in languages that hurt to hear, building structures that follow geometries that shouldn't exist in 3-dimensional space, worshipping things that don't have names we can pronounce. We call them the changed ones. And we avoid their territories because once you get too close, once you hear them singing their hymns, you don't come back as yourself. She traced a circle on the map around the Giza plateau. Your vault is going to fail soon, the way you described that stasis field. When it does, everyone inside will change, and then the thing they were containing will be free to do whatever it was trying to do before the ancient Egyptians imprisoned it. Could be months, could be years, but it's coming, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. I thought about everyone still in Vault Giza, about the people I'd grown up with, the friends and family who had no idea what was waiting for them in the depths. The new pharaoh had known, or at least suspected. That's why Sublevel Omega was so heavily restricted, why the Crimson Scarabs had fled, why Vault-Tec's experiments had been classified at the highest levels. The leadership had been protecting themselves, planning their own escape routes, while condemning everyone else to transformation or death. We need to evacuate the vault, I said. Get everyone out before the containment fails completely. The caravan leader shook her head. Won't work. We've tried with other vaults, warning people, showing them evidence, offering them refuge in surface settlements. Most won't leave. They've been breathing that artifact radiation their whole lives. It's already changed them enough that they can't conceive of abandoning the structure, can't imagine life without the pyramid. It's like deprogramming a cult, except the programming is written into their neurons at a molecular level. The ones who do leave, who have enough independence left to make that choice, they're usually the youngest, the ones with the least exposure. She handed me a water bottle, real purified water, not the irradiated sludge from the Nile. Best thing you can do is head west, past the rad zones, find a settlement far enough from the artifact sites that you can think clearly. New Cairo is relatively clean, built on ruins that were never sacred, never used for Vault-Tec's projects. People there are mostly normal, descendants of vault dwellers and wastelanders who escaped the influence. It's not much, but it's better than what's coming for the pyramid vaults. I traveled with the caravan for 3 days, learning about the world that had emerged from the atomic fire. The Nile Delta was a patchwork of territories, each controlled by different factions with different ideologies and levels of mutation. The Tomb Kings in the south, feral descendants of escaped vault dwellers who'd gone completely native, worshipping the artifacts directly and raiding settlements for sacrifices. The scarab merchants in Alexandria, pragmatic traders who dealt in pre-war technology and human labor with equal indifference. The children of Adam along the coast, radiation worshippers who saw the nuclear holocaust as divine judgment, and the artifacts as angels of their radioactive god. And everywhere, the changed ones, spreading slowly from failed containment sites, converting or consuming anyone who got too close. They built their impossible structures in the ruins of ancient cities, sang their reality, bending hymns in the darkness, and waited for more of their kind to awaken. The caravan gave them wide berth, detouring around entire regions that had fallen under their influence, areas where the laws of physics seemed negotiable and human consciousness became fluid and malleable. On the fourth day, we were attacked by a rad scorpion pack. 8 of them, each the size of a pre-war automobile, their carapaces glowing faint green from absorbed radiation. They came at us from downwind, bursting from the sand in a coordinated assault that spoke of intelligence far beyond normal predator behavior. The caravan guards opened fire immediately, laser weapons cutting through the night, superheated chitin filling the air with a smell like burning plastic. I killed my first rad scorpion that night, putting a sustained beam through the soft tissue between its head and thorax, watching it collapse in a heap of twitching legs and leaking ichor. The venom sac was intact, the size of a human head, filled with luminescent poison that could drop a Brahmin in seconds. The caravan leader harvested it carefully, explaining that processed raid scorpion venom sold for a fortune in the surface markets, used for everything from medicine to recreational drugs to industrial solvents. We lost one person in the attack, a young man who'd taken a stinger through the chest, the venom causing his organs to liquefy before anyone could administer an antidote. They buried him in the sand with minimal ceremony, marking the grave with his rifle driven butt first into the ground. Death was common enough in the Wasteland that elaborate funerals were a luxury few could afford. You mourned quickly and moved on, because stopping too long in one place meant attracting predators or raiders, or worse. New Cairo appeared on the 5th day, rising from the desert like a mirage that refused to disappear. Mud brick buildings mixed with pre-war concrete, solar panels cobbled together from salvaged materials, wind turbines made from aircraft parts and Brahmin bones. It was ugly and chaotic and gloriously alive. 3,000 people living without vault walls or pyramid tombs, without artifacts whispering in their subconscious or ancient curses defining their existence. The caravan leader introduced me to the settlement's council, a group of elders who governed through consensus rather than divine mandate or corporate hierarchy. I showed them the data crystals I'd stolen from sublevel Omega, played the video logs, explained what Vault-Tec had done and what was coming when the containment fields failed. They listened with the grim patience of people who'd heard similar stories before, who knew that the pre-war world had left behind horrors that would take generations to fully understand. "We've been tracking the containment failures," one of the council members said, an old man whose grandmother had escaped Vault Karnak before it fell, 7 sites completely lost, another dozen showing signs of instability. The changed ones are spreading faster than we can map their territories. In 10 years, maybe 20, the entire Nile Valley will be their domain. Everyone who stays will be converted or killed, and humanity as we understand it will cease to exist in this region. "So, what do we do?" I asked, feeling the weight of helplessness settle over me like a burial shroud. "We survive," another council member said, a woman who wore a necklace made from pre-war circuit boards. "We document what we can, preserve what knowledge survives, and we run when we have to. The artifacts existed before humans, and they'll exist after humans. Our job isn't to defeat them, it's to make sure that when they finally break free completely, there are still people left who remember what humanity was, who can rebuild far enough away that the changed ones can't reach them." They offered me a place in New Cairo, work as a scout or guard, a chance to build a new life away from the vaults and their poisoned legacies. I accepted because what else could I do? Return to Vault Giza and watch everyone I'd ever known slowly transform into something alien? Walk into the desert and let the radiation or the predators finish what Vault-Tec had started? At least here I could fight, could help others escape, could try to salvage some meaning from the horror. But I think about them sometimes, the people still in the vault, my friends in the cartouche corps, the farmers in the Valley of the Kings, even the new pharaoh with his painted power armor and delusions of divinity. They're breathing artifact radiation with every breath, their minds slowly being overwritten by something that sees humanity as raw material for purposes we can't comprehend. And when the stasis field finally fails, when the thing in sublevel Omega breaks free, they'll welcome it with hymns and prayers, believing themselves blessed when they're actually being consumed. The pyramids still stand on the horizon, visible from New Cairo's walls on clear days, eternal monuments to civilizations that built them as prisons and tombs, now serving as incubators for humanity's transformation into something else. Vault-Tec thought they could control these forces, harness them to rebuild civilization according to their corporate vision. Instead, they just accelerated the inevitable, ensured that when the old gods finally returned, they'd find a population already prepared to worship them. I'm recording this confession on a salvaged holotape, one of dozens I've made documenting what I saw in sublevel Omega and what I've learned since escaping. If Vault Giza falls, if the containment fails and the changed ones spread across the delta, at least there will be a record. Someone will know that we tried to fight, that we didn't surrender without resistance, that humanity went down swinging even when the odds were impossible. To anyone listening who's still in a vault, especially vaults built in ancient sites or sacred spaces, check your lower levels. Look for chambers that aren't on official maps, radiation signatures that don't have explanations, locked doors with Omega-level security clearance. If you find something like what I found, don't try to study it or understand it or use it. Run. Get everyone you can out and run as far and as fast as possible, because some prisons were built for good reasons and some doors should stay sealed forever. The sand outside my window is glowing tonight, bioluminescent patterns spreading across the desert like electric veins. The changed ones are singing somewhere in the distance, reality-bending hymns that make my teeth ache even from miles away. And beneath the Giza Plateau, in chambers 400 feet below the pyramid's base, something ancient stirs in its weakening prison, counting down the days until it can reach out and reshape the world in its image. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It's the only way I know you liked the video. And if you're planning your own escape from a vault that feels wrong, that has secrets your leaders won't explain, don't wait. Don't convince yourself that everything will be fine, that the pre-war builders knew what they were doing, that your overseer has your best interests at heart. They don't, and they never did. The vaults were never about saving humanity. They were about transforming us into something that could survive what comes next. And what comes next, friends, is going to make the nuclear war look like the opening act. The pyramids have stood for 5,000 years. They'll stand for 5,000 more. The question is whether there will still be humans around to remember why they were built, or if we'll all be changed ones by then, singing hymns in languages that predate speech, serving masters that existed before the first cell divided in Earth's primordial oceans. I survived Vault Giza. I escaped the pyramid's shadow and found something like freedom in the Wasteland. But I'm not free. Not really, because I know what's coming, what's waking up beneath the sand, and there's nowhere far enough to run when gods older than humanity finally break their chains. The Nile still flows, the desert still kills, and the pyramids still stand, eternal tombs for things that should never have been disturbed. This is my warning. This is my confession. This is the truth that Vault-Tec buried 200 years ago and that I'm bringing back into the light. May it do more good than harm.